Well, welcome back, everybody. We attended to some business in the Shrine of Amana last time, but at the end of the day, we haven't really learned anything of use about where we should go. So, going back to an old metric that I've used for years on end, I'm going to explore all the places that I have not yet explored. If you're lost, then that's a pretty good place to start. Today we're going to be using a couple of weapons and pieces that we picked up in the Undead Crypt. This is the Warmth Pyromancy. It essentially puts a little healing bubble at the point of casting, and anybody that stays around it will get gradually healed over time, for quite a bit. In terms of raw healing efficiency, like per cast, this is definitely the strongest heal in the game. It just takes a while. Enemies can also take advantage of it, so be careful where you put it. In our right hand, we're wielding the Mace of the Insolent. This is a unique weapon that, along with acting as a mace and hitting people, can also cast hexes and miracles. It's a pretty good primary weapon for those kinds of builds. These headstones don't make an awful lot of sense. But each DLC area is prefaced by them. Our current destination is the Crown of the Sunken King DLC area. Aside from this free place to light your torch, there's not a lot going on in this opening room except for some very odd headstones. Each DLC area starts out like this, with a sort of lobby room, a big door, and then the entrance to the actual area. Now, the Sunken King DLC takes place far below the ground in the dankest corners of Drang Lake. If this is even Drang Lake, it's kind of unclear, to be honest, in a lot of the DLC areas, if this is still even remotely in the same area. Sanctum City Shulva certainly looks impressive on first glance. And it's a bit of a change from nominal Dark Souls to architecture, in that you can actually visit basically every place you see there. Oh, hello. Okay, walk slow, just play it cool. Well, the bit about the sleeping dragon was explained pretty quickly. Poor thing looks to have a pole stuck in it. I'm sort of impressed it can get any sleep at all like that. Now, in Sanctum City, there are a couple of unique items that are unique to the DLC and cannot be found anywhere else. Not just equipment and stuff, but also some consumables, like that old growth balm. Balms will increase stats temporarily, and just generally give you a bit of a buff to that. Old growth increases strength, I believe. There's several different kinds, and I don't have them memorized, sorry to say. These enemies will be primarily what you face in the first area of Sanctum City. I believe they're called Sanctum soldiers. They're pretty obnoxious, to be honest. They're durable, they have a lot of poise, they do a lot of damage, and they can poison you with their attacks. Some of them can also snipe you. However, in this case, the terrain can be part of our advantage. If we hit this switch with an arrow, by the way, be sure to bring a healthy supply of projectiles here. Even if you're a magic user, bring at least a short bow or a light crossbow or something. You will need them to trigger those switches. You can also just go up to them and whack them, that's not always an option. And as you can see, if you hit them in certain places, you can actually use the moving terrain to damage the enemies. Which is pretty helpful since these guys are beefy as heck. I'm pretty pleased with how the Mace of the Insolent is working out. I was not expecting a whole lot because enemies in this DLC, and pretty much all DLCs actually, tend to have high elemental resistances, and the Mace of the Insolent does lightning and dark damage. The Sanctum soldiers wield a wide variety of weapons. Well, actually, it's not a wide variety, it's 4. But, anyway. So, they can use their huge maces, which hurt. They can also use a combination of bow and sword, which are less painful but quicker. And there's one other type that we have not yet encountered. Warmth is great for situations like that if you're patient. This does basically shit all, but I did want to show off the hex casting capability of the Mace of the Insolent. If I was at all spec'd into, like, casting, instead of just having a couple of points invested into faith for utility stuff, then that would probably have done a lot more damage, and that functionality would be a lot better. But as it stands, it's more of just a novelty that I wanted to show off, especially because it's unique in that it's a mace that has a little chime in it, and it actually makes chimey noises, and I like it a lot. Now, I wasn't kidding. Warmth lasts for a very long time, so putting it in a safe spot like this and then retreating to it is perfectly a viable strategy. Also, just as sort of a non sequitur apology, I got super little sleep last night, but I've taken a couple days off just to get some quality time with Bloodborne, so I figured I should do something. So, please bear with me, I'm trying to keep my eyes open. To successfully maneuver around this area, you need to be able to effectively manipulate those switches to move the architecture around to your advantage. Mostly this just comes down to a bit of trial and error and seeing which switch does what and where you can safely go and where you safely cannot go. Now, that always entails a little bit of trepidation, because you never quite know what's going to wait for you at the bottom of a drop. Another unique thing about the DLC stuff is that they are quite fond of giving you highly upgraded versions of weapons that you could have gotten much earlier, like that longbow. I'm not quite sure why, but it's fairly useful if you want to try out something new later on and not be totally hamstrung by it. This is the final variety of Sanctum soldier, the kind with the lance and the shield. I would say that they're probably the most dangerous, simply because the shield gives them even more defense than they already have, so rushdown strategies are even more ineffective. That, and they tend to play more conservatively than the kind with the maces and the swords. For instance, that guy just kind of came barreling out of nowhere and left himself wide open. Or would have if I was paying attention. If you have the poise for it, it's always an option, albeit a bad one, to simply trade hits and kill them before they kill you. But in a game where healing is fairly limited, you should probably avoid trades like that. It's just not a good idea. This first part of Sanctum City is really quite confusing, and it can take a while to just find your way through, let alone memorize where you need to go. So just take your time, take it easy, go back and restock if you need to, nothing's going anywhere. Also beware of acid-spitting bugs. These guys can poison you as well as degrade your equipment if you stand in the orange cloud. The strange red pods that they like to hang out next to will do the same thing if you break them open while you're standing next to them. So having a good supply of repair powder on hand, or paying close attention to what you're doing, is advisable. Then again, both of those things are basically advisable for all situations. At any rate, I feel like I've shown off the mace enough, so I'm going to switch back to my old partisan standby. That's not particularly more effective in terms of damage, but it's a bit safer. More versatile, too. The mace attack animation kind of locks you into certain unfortunate places at times. The soldiers are probably the most weak to backstabs. Most of their attacks have pretty significant wind-ups and cooldowns. So if you're light on your feet and you can get behind them, stabbing them in the back should not be a difficulty at all. The red bugs are not especially threatening, but they do have the ability to make a sort of delayed leap through the air at you, and their melee attacks do appreciable damage. So you need to be mindful of them if you hear their chittering, because if you simply leave them alone, there's a good chance you'll get burned. This area holds quite a few different secrets and nooks and crannies, so a thorough exploration will take some time. There's also the consideration that you have to master the switches, so you might spend quite a bit of time in this area if you want to get everything. You know, sometimes you die in a really stupid way. And that sort of slows things down even more. If we were to take any educational benefit from that encounter, then I would say it is simply not to underestimate the Sanctum soldiers just because there's so many of them. They are a great deal stronger than basically any other enemy up to this point. The DLC was designed more or less to be done at the end of the game-ish. So while you can actually come here very early in the game if you rush the Rotten down, coming here that early will also be pretty darn hard. Not impossible, but simply doing enough damage to these guys before they kill you can become quite a task if you don't have particularly strong weapon upgrades. The Helix Halberd, how I love it, is quite effective here because the enemies are fairly slow, and the double hit that it does with the impaling stake actually gets these guys to stagger, which is pretty significant. Not many weapons can do that. There are a lot of soldiers just sort of hanging around the place in a couple of pretty obscure spots, so try not to overdo it. Don't rush in if you don't know what you're doing. Take it slow and steady. Don't do what I just did and jump onto this platform, because there's two guys here, and while I handle it pretty well, if you're not expecting it, they can wreck your shit in short order. If you're not a fan of needlessly perilous leaps, then simply hit the switch under there, and that will put both pieces of the path to that little alcove in place, so you don't have to jump. A third new kind of enemy is particularly obnoxious. The poison-spitting statues make a return, this time in a sort of fucked-up mobile weapons platform style. It's really weird. Even weirder is the fact that they are basically immune to melee weapons, and you need to use a bow to hit their vulnerable spot, which is their little heads underneath the statues. They're not particularly dangerous or menacing, but they can get in the way, and they are worth killing because they sometimes drop Twinkling Titanite, which, you know, is pretty good. Always be on the lookout for the Twinklies. Sometimes you briefly forget that you only have a bow equipped. That's one of the downsides of heavy armor. You have to make do with only equipping one weapon at a time to keep under equip burden, and then you have to go into the menu and switch when you need to change, and it can be a little dicey. Now, the architectural style in Shulva is actually quite a bit different than almost anything else in the game so far. Certainly, we have found no areas with such an emphasis on moving parts. Not even Hade's Tower of Flame, wherein we had to raise the Dragon Rider arena, were there quite so many switches and tricks to get various pieces of buildings up and out. The design also sort of, what's the word? Strays fairly heavily from the, medieval European classical style of architecture and more into, like, ziggurats and stuff. Like the temple we saw at the very beginning that sort of dominated the landscape was very much in the style of not a castle or an old cathedral, but something a great deal more, less European influenced. I'm really eloquent today. Like, holy shit. I promise I'll do the next one of these after I've gotten more than like 3 hours of sleep. I figured I spent so much time playing Bloodborne instead of doing Thing. I should do a Thing even if I'm not entirely 100% up to it. Well, this is new. This is not actually a scripted encounter, by the way. This is just another player with a certain degree of dedication. The Shulva girl does not seem inclined to exchange salutations, and I don't seem very inclined to actually watch my footing. At least she had the common sense to follow me. I mean, that's just courtesy. Basic etiquette. Well, let's get ourselves dusted off from that and continue on. The Helix Halberd is a real godsend in this area because it speeds up clearing out the soldiers by a pretty good clip. Characters that you'd like to use lighter weapons will have a much more difficult time because of these guys and how much poise they have. In fact, I would say that the Helix Halberd is probably the lightest weapon in general that can reliably make them stagger. Like, if you've got an ultra great sword, or a big great hammer, or a great axe, or a great whatever, then yeah, you'll probably be okay. But that takes a lot of investment into strength and endurance and vitality. Helix Halberd, not so much. It's a fairly modest investment for the power the weapon has. Sorry, over the past couple videos, this thread has sort of become the Helix Halberd appreciation station. It occurs to me that last time we were here, we didn't actually explore the area that we unlocked up on this platform. That was embarrassing. Also implausible. So is that. There we go. There's some more buggies in this room. And the reward for coming here is not particularly special or enticing, but it's also not very much effort, so... You get what you pay for, in all aspects of life. Certainly an Elizabeth mushroom is never unwelcome. Though to be perfectly honest with you, I don't think I've ever used one. I tend to suffer from Mega Elixir Syndrome pretty bad in video games. Now, before taking on this tract of land, I do feel like I should take advantage of this sniper spot, which in some ways feels like the real reward for coming up here. You get a very nice vantage point, and if you have a long-range bow, then you can do some serious damage without really putting yourself in danger. It's not the most thrilling thing to do, I grant you. You also start facing some damage fall-off, even with great bows and longbows at this distance. So I have a cunning plan to put into action as I get shot in the knee. And I decide to equip the hawk ring. Wow, that did basically nothing. Okay. Another cunning plan that I have that is significantly more effective is to put down a dollop of warmth here and simply hang out next to it while I snipe these guys. It basically ensures that I do not have any danger of getting killed by counter snipes. It's already pretty low because most of their shots actually fall short before they even reach me, but some manage to get through, and obnoxiously enough, they don't suffer from damage fall off. That little bit of sniping aside, it's time to move on. The way back, safely anyway, lies this way. Though I couldn't remember if there was something beneath, and it turns out there wasn't, so another couple seconds wasted. Now, these roving statue colonies don't really need to be dealt with. They're pretty easy to run past, but again, I have a hankering for Twinkling Titanite, so anything that has a chance of dropping it is probably going to die. Now, the reason that you might not want to take this area on in a straightforward manner is not only do you have to deal with the soldier snipers, lance-wielding soldiers will also pop up from the ground. If you advance too quickly, then you can find yourself in a bit of a scrape pretty hastily. The Sanctum Soldier Gauntlet is a unique piece of armor, not only because it only drops from the Sanctum Soldiers, but because it is the only part of the Sanctum Soldier set, which means that it's a set of one and not really a set at all. It also has the unique effect of increasing the efficiency of any poison buildup you might have on your weapons. So, if you like using poison weapons, like the Manslayer or Mythos Bent Blade, then equipping those gauntlets can really increase your damage output. They're a little bit like the engraved gauntlets we got back in Brightstone Cove that gave you critical hit chance, except this version of it is a little bit more reliable, albeit more specialized. I hate stairs. Oh well, this is why we brought Caressing Prayer. Or just moss. I have plenty of moss. I think that at that point I realized that I didn't have a chime equipped. Those ominous red-eyed statues over there hide a secret. There's two ways to get to it. One, bring some destructive great arrows. I believe certain magic spells will also work, but destructive great arrows seem to be the most reliable way. These will take out the statues and open up a clear shot to a hidden switch. Hitting the switch raises this bridge. The secondary way to get to that switch is to simply drop down here before raising the bridge and land on the ceiling. That will give you a clearer angle at the switch without having to destroy anything. So if you didn't bring a great bow or magic spells, that is probably the way you're going to get it. In this side passage, there's a bunch more of these guys. They also drop human effigies, so yeah, pretty worthwhile to kill, even if it takes a bit. Of course, there is such a thing as doing it so poorly that you end up expending more resources than you gain. And at the end of the passage is this strange-looking thing. Appears to be some variety of living tree. At very least, it doesn't appear hostile. We also find a notched whip +7, and the promised block of peace hex, which slows down both you and everybody around you. It's pretty powerful in PvP if you're the one who initiates it, because you'll be expecting it. Now, here's a trick. Oh, hello again. If you hit this living tree with a whip, if you're some kind of weird sadist, I guess, then the tree will release spores, I guess, that will repair your equipment. At least anything you currently have on you. Since our helix halberd is looking a little bit worn down, I figure I'll do that again, use the whip in my offhand, and get a free repair. This is a very strange and unnecessary detail, but in that sense, it's very Dark Souls. Now, with that explanation out of the way, I still have to deal with Shulva Girl. I considered waiting for her here because I know there aren't any pits or enemies, but I figured, you know, that would be boring. Certainly nothing like the rest of this video. Well, at least she gives us a proper greeting this time. Now, there are still enemies alive back there, so she might be luring us into a trap. Or she might not. She might just be sort of running around for no reason. Now, latency plays a curious role in this particular encounter. The lag stabs are real, and the lag stabs are strong. She also threw a Lloyd's Talisman at us, which is pretty smart if you're going to go PvPing. We can no longer heal with Estus Flask. That's basically 3 consecutive stabs from a row from each of us that didn't make a whole lot of sense. At least I managed to dodge that one. Well, that's kind of unsatisfying for everybody. I hate it when duels end like that, and I feel like they shouldn't be able to. Like, I feel like that in a PvP situation, if somebody hits first in that scenario, then they should at least not take that last hit from the enemy that they just killed. I feel like that in most cases, that's not possible with, like, normal enemies. So I feel like that its inclusion there is mostly a product of lag. So, you know, just something to consider. It has been rather eventful, though we haven't really made a whole lot of progress. It's sort of a deceptive area in that sense. There's lots to do and lots to find, but in terms of geographic area covered, Sanctum City is honestly kind of small. So if you know exactly where you want to go and you don't really want to pick up... Oh god, this is a great situation. If you don't really want to pick up any of the extraneous stuff, then you can be done very quickly. Alternatively, you can be like me and go for everything and get invaded twice and just generally die like a doofus. I think the fatigue was starting to set in a little bit here because I did not tackle this particular section very well on this pass. I mean, I'm alive. That's good enough for jazz, I guess. Oh, God. Good enough for jazz. I can't even get my anachronistic turns of phrase right. Close enough for jazz. Bit of a scary situation there. Now, ultimately, our goal is along this stretch. I'm going to take it on the proper way this time, simply because sniping would take forever. It's not immensely difficult, but it's kind of annoying. Especially if they manage to headshot you and stun you for like a minute and a half. Gonna stick this here because I might need to retreat again. You can save a lot on Estus Flask if you simply use warmth intelligently. So naturally I forget to use it most of the time. Once you close the distance, it's pretty manageable. At least until that guy comes and clocks you in the back of the head. Alright. Our ultimate destination for this video will require the activation of a couple more switches. Some of which are not readily accessible by land, so we're going to need to get our crossbow out. As far as I can tell, the pillar on the right side there, all by its lonesome, doesn't serve much of a purpose. Stairs still suck. So do these guys. Even so, even with the completely unupgraded light crossbow with wooden bolts, I think, it still only dies in like a couple shots, so they're not dangerous or difficult to take down, they're just kind of obnoxious. This is the ultimate goal. You want to raise these platforms to make a bridge to a bonfire. A fairly well-hidden bonfire. Next video's destination lies ahead of us. But for now, I'm kind of tired of dying, so I think I'm going to take a break and maybe sleep for 16 hours.